I'm Dunley Hughes, 68. A retired veteran who spent decades believing my war buddies were nothing but forgotten memories. For 20 years, my son Marcus treated me like a burden, constantly reminding me that my dead loser friends from Vietnam were just that dead and worthless. His words cut deeper each time, especially when he'd roll his eyes at my stories, or refuse to let his kids hear about their grandfather's service. Last Tuesday, everything I thought I knew shattered when a lawyer knocked on my door with news that would expose not just my son's cruelty, but a truth so profound it would flip our entire relationship upside down. My war buddies weren't dead, they were alive, thriving, and had been searching for me for decades. What my son said next would change everything between us forever. The house felt too quiet these days. Had been since Margaret passed 5 years ago. I'd sit in my recliner most evenings, staring at the faded photograph on the side table for young soldiers in Vietnam fatigues, arms draped over each other's shoulders, grinning despite the hell we'd lived through. Tommy Chen on my left, barely 19 but already our unofficial strategist. Rick Martinez next to him, always cracking jokes to keep our spirits up. Jose Rodriguez on my right, the quiet one who'd saved my life twice and never mentioned it again. Marcus used to ask about that picture when he was little. "Tell me about the war, Daddy," he'd say, climbing onto my lap with wide, curious eyes. Those were different times when he still looked at me like I was a hero instead of a burden. The change happened gradually, like rust eating through metal. First, it was eye rolls when I'd start a story. Then interruptions with, "I've heard this before, Dad." Eventually, it became outright hostility. "Nobody wants to hear about your dead friends and their loser war stories." He'd snap whenever I mentioned Vietnam. Margaret tried to mediate. "He's just going through a phase," she'd whisper. But we both knew it was deeper than that. Marcus resented me for reasons I couldn't understand, maybe because I'd never achieved the financial success he thought I should have. Maybe because my stories reminded him of sacrifice he'd never experienced. After Margaret died, things got worse. Marcus moved me into his spare room, claiming it was for my own good, but I knew the truth. His construction business was struggling. His wife, Linda, had expensive tastes, and my social security check helped cover their mortgage. What hurt most wasn't being needed for money yet, was being treated like I was worthless, except for that monthly payment. "Your war buddies are dead losers," just like their stories, became his favorite phrase whenever I dared mention the past. He'd say it in front of his kids, my grandchildren, poisoning them against the grandfather who'd once worn his uniform with pride. 10-year-old Sarah would look at me with confusion, and 8-year-old David would actually flinch when I tried to tell him about courage and brotherhood. The cruelest part was how Marcus had twisted my own words against me. Years ago, I'd mentioned losing touch with my unit after the war, how the chaos of coming home, changing addresses, and starting families had scattered us to the winds. "See," Marcus would say, "they probably forgot about you the day you left. Real friends don't just disappear." I'd stopped correcting him months ago. What was the point? Each argument only seemed to make him angrier, more convinced that his old man was living in a fantasy world of imaginary heroes and non-existent friendships. But holding that photograph each night, I remembered the truth Marcus refused to believe. These weren't dead losers, they were the finest men I'd ever known. Tommy, who'd shared his last cigarette with me before the Battle of Dong Ha. Rick, who'd carried wounded soldiers twice his size to safety. Jose, whose quiet faith had kept us all sane during the worst firefights. They weren't dead, and they sure as hell weren't losers. Somewhere out there, if they were still alive, they were living lives of dignity and purpose. The kind of lives I'd once dreamed of before I'd settled for being grateful that my son still let me sleep under his roof. That photograph was the only thing Marcus hadn't convinced me to throw away. Tomorrow, I told myself, clutching it against my chest, I'd finally have the courage to stop letting his words define my past. The knock came at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, sharp and professional. Marcus had already left for a job site, and I was nursing my second cup of coffee when I opened the door to find a woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed, holding a leather briefcase. "Mr. Dunley Hughes." Her voice carried authority, but also warmth. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, attorney with Mitchell and Associates. I represent the estates of several Vietnam veterans, and I believe you served with my clients." My hand tightened on the doorframe. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but if this is about some kind of veterans benefit or class action lawsuit, Mr. Hughes," she interrupted gently, "this is about Tommy Chen, Rick Martinez, and Jose Rodriguez. They've been looking for you for 15 years. The coffee mug slipped from my other hand, shattering against the porch. Sarah Mitchell stepped back slightly, her expression shifting to concern. "They're alive." The words came out as barely a whisper. "Very much so. May I come in? What I need to discuss with you is quite substantial." I led her to the kitchen table, my legs unsteady. She opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency, removing a thick folder of documents. "Mr. Hughes, are you familiar with Chen Technologies, Martinez Construction Enterprises, or Rodriguez Holdings?" I shook my head, still trying to process that my friends were alive. Tommy Chen founded a software company in 1987 that he sold to Microsoft in 2019 for $52 million. Rick Martinez built the largest commercial construction firm in Texas, worth approximately $37 million. Jose Rodriguez developed luxury resorts across the Southwest. His company's current valuation exceeds $60 million. The numbers felt surreal, like she was talking about strangers. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with me?" Sarah pulled out a faded document, carefully preserved in plastic. "This is a partnership agreement, drafted in 1969, signed by all four of you during your last week in Vietnam. Do you remember this?" I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. We'd been drunk on rice wine, celebrating our survival, dreaming of the businesses we'd start together when we got home. Tommy had actually written it out on official-looking paper he'd stolen from the command post, making us all sign it like it was a real contract. We were just kids, dreaming. "Mr. Hughes, your friends never forgot this agreement. When each of them achieved success, they set aside your share. There's a trust fund that's been growing for decades, waiting for you to claim it." She slid another document across the table. The numbers on the bank statement made no sense. 7 figures. 7. This can't be real. It's very real. Additionally, they've purchased a home for you in San Antonio, near where all three of them live now. They want you to join them in retirement, to finally honor the brotherhood you all swore to maintain. I thought of Marcus's words, echoing in my head. "Dead losers." My hands shook as I touched the documents. "They've been searching for you, through private investigators, veterans organizations, even hiring a company that specializes in locating lost military personnel. Your son's name change after his divorce made you harder to find. They were looking for someone with a surname Thompson. That explained it. Marcus had taken his ex-wife's name after their bitter divorce, and I'd been living with him for years. Under that identity, they want to see me." Sarah Mitchell smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen in months. "Mr. Hughes, Tommy Chen has been waiting by his phone for 3 days, hoping I'd find you. They've planned a reunion that's 15 years overdue." I stared at the trust fund statement again, at proof that somewhere in this world, 3 men had never forgotten the promises we'd made to each other in a foxhole half a century ago. "What do I need to do?" "First, we need to verify your identity with military records, which I can handle. Then, if you're willing, I'd like to arrange a phone call. They're very eager to hear your voice." For the first time in years, I felt something stirring in my chest that I'd almost forgotten. Hope. My war buddies weren't dead losers. They were successful, loyal friends who'd spent fortunes trying to find me. Marcus was going to lose his mind. After Sarah Mitchell left, I retreated to my room and pulled out the old journal I'd hidden beneath my sweaters. Margaret had given it to me years ago, encouraging me to write down my war stories before I forgot them. Marcus would have called it pathetic, an old man clinging to ancient history. But those pages held the truth about the men he'd dismissed as losers. Firebase. Charlie met the strangest collection of guys today. Tommy Chen from San Francisco barely looks old enough to shave, but talks like he's got the whole world figured out. Says he's going to start a business empire when he gets home. Rick Martinez from El Paso keeps us laughing even when the mortars are coming in. And Jose Rodriguez, man, a few words, but I'd trust him with my life already. I remembered that first day like it was yesterday. 4 scared kids thrown together by the lottery of war, none of us knowing we'd become closer than brothers. Tommy was the dreamer, always sketching business plans on ammunition boxes and napkins. Rick was our morale officer, finding humor in the darkest moments. Jose was our anchor, steady and unshakable when everything else fell apart. Dong Hatami saved our asses today. Spotted movement in the tree line that the rest of us missed. His eyes are like a hawk's, always watching, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He says it's because his dad taught him chess, but I think it's just how his brain works. Rick jokes that Tommy could find profit in a pile of serrations, but there's truth in it. The kid sees opportunities where others see obstacles. The Battle of Dong Ha had been our baptism by fire. Tommy's quick thinking during that ambush had kept us all breathing. While other soldiers panicked, he'd calculated angles and cover positions like he was solving a math problem. Even then, at 19, he had the mind of a strategist. Keith Sandrick carried Johnson almost 2 miles today after the mortar attack. Johnson must weigh twice what Rick does. But Rick just kept joking about how Johnson better name his first kid after him. Martinez Johnson, he kept saying, has a nice ring to it. Made us all laugh while we were scared shitless. That's Rick's gift. He makes you believe everything's going to be okay, even when it isn't. Rick's humor had been our lifeline during the worst firefights. He'd crack jokes while bullets whizzed overhead, tell stories about his grandmothers, cooking while we ate cold rations in the rain. But underneath the laughs was a steel spine. I'd seen him run into enemy fire to drag wounded soldiers to safety, never hesitating, never asking for recognition. Firebase Alpha Jose doesn't talk much, but when he does, we all listen. Today he told us about his grandfather's ranch in New Mexico, how his family built something from nothing through hard work and patience. Says that's what he wants to do when he gets home, build something that lasts. The way he talks about land and legacy, you can tell he's got vision beyond just surviving this war. Jose had been our philosopher, the one who thought beyond the immediate horror to what life might look like afterward. While the rest of us focused on getting through each day, Jose planned for decades ahead. He'd talk about sustainable development and treating workers fairly, concepts that seemed impossibly idealistic in a war zone, but made perfect sense coming from him. Last night incontricant, believe we're all going home tomorrow. Made a pact, tonight we'll start businesses together, be partners in whatever comes next. Tommy drew up some crazy contract on official paper he borrowed. We all signed it, drunk on rice wine and possibilities. Rick says we'll call ourselves the 4 Horsemen of Commerce. Jose just smiled and said, some promises are worth keeping forever. That night felt like the beginning of everything. We'd survived hell together, and naively believed that meant we'd conquer peace together too. Tommy had been so serious about that contract, making us all sign with our full names and serial numbers. Rick had drawn little cartoon horses around the edges. Jose had simply written "Brothers" in all things beneath his signature. The war ended for us the next morning, but we'd thought our partnership was just beginning. Then reality hit. The chaos of discharge processing, the urgency of getting home to families we hadn't seen in over a year, the overwhelming need to pretend the war had never happened at all conspired to scatter us. We'd exchanged addresses, but addresses change. Phone numbers change, people change. Within 2 years, my letters to Tommy were being returned, addressee unknown. Rick's construction company in El Paso had closed, according to directory assistants. Jose seemed to have vanished entirely. I'd tried for a while, then life took over: marriage, children, jobs. The daily grind of survival that made Vietnam feel like someone else's war. But they'd never forgotten. While I was letting Marcus convince me they were dead losers, they were building empires and setting aside my share, honoring a promise made by 4 young soldiers who'd believed in brotherhood more than profit. Tommy's software genius, Rick's construction empire, Jose's resort dynasty. Of it surprised me now that I remembered who they really were. I'd known their character when it mattered most, when character was the difference between life and death. Marcus had never understood that war doesn't create bonds, it reveals them. We hadn't become brothers in Vietnam. We'd simply discovered we already were. Marcus stormed through the front door at 6:30 p.m. Work boots caked with mud, his face already twisted with a familiar expression that meant his day had gone badly. I'd been rehearsing what to tell him for hours, but nothing had prepared me for the rage that erupted when I mentioned the lawyer's visit. What lawyer? He dropped his tool belt with a crash that shook the living room. Dad, please tell me you didn't sign anything. I didn't sign anything. Marcus, you just wanted to talk about what? Let me guess, some veteran scam. Right. Free money for old soldiers. Jesus Christ, Dad, how many times do I have to tell you these people prey on seniors? I pulled out Sarah Mitchell's business card, my hand steadier than it had been all day. It wasn't a scam. It was about Tommy, Rick, and Jose. The color drained from Marcus's face, then rushed back as deep red. Your imaginary war buddies. The dead losers. Are you kidding me right now? They're not dead, Marcus. They're very much alive, and they've been looking for me for 15 years. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just bitter disbelief. Of course they have. Let me guess. They're all millionaires now, and they want to share their fortune with dear old Dunley. Right. Dad, this is the oldest con in the book. I tried to show him the documents, but he waved them away like they were contaminated. These can be faked. Anyone with a computer can make official-looking papers. These people studied you, Dad. They know you're lonely. They know you talk about these guys, so they're using that against you. Marcus, listen to me. No, you listen to me. His voice cracked with desperation. I've been taking care of you for 5 years. 5 years of making sure you have a roof over your head, food on the table, someone to drive you to doctor's appointments. And now some stranger shows up with fairy tales, and you're ready to believe them over your own son. The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I had been more willing to believe Sarah Mitchell than Marcus, but only because Marcus had spent years making me feel worthless. Look at this, Marcus continued, pulling a crumpled credit card statement from his pocket. The numbers were mostly red, maxed out credit lines, and minimum payments past due. You see this? This is what taking care of you costs. Linda's been on my ass about money for months. The kids need school clothes, and the truck needs new tires. We're barely hanging on, and now you want to chase some fantasy about rich war heroes. I'd never seen the credit card statements before, never realized how tight money had become. The guilt hit me immediately, exactly what Marcus intended. I didn't know things were so difficult. Of course, you didn't know. Because I protect you from the real world. Dad, I don't burden you with our problems because I'm trying to be a good son. But apparently that doesn't matter when some con artist shows up with a briefcase full of lies. He sank into his recliner, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. Think about it logically, Dad. If these guys were really your friends, if they were really successful, why wouldn't they have found you before now? You've been at the same address for 3 years, same phone number. Hell, you're on Facebook. Linda set up that account for you, remember? The doubt crept in, despite everything. Marcus was right about some things. If Tommy, Rick, and Jose had unlimited resources, why had it taken so long to find me? Maybe they, maybe nothing. Marcus stood up, his voice taking on the patronizing tone that always made me feel small. Dad, I love you, but you're 78 years old. Your memory isn't what it used to be. You get confused sometimes. And you're vulnerable to people who want to take advantage of that. I'm not confused about this, aren't you? When's the last time you actually heard from any of these guys? Not letters returned, not phone numbers disconnected. When did you last have a real conversation with Tommy Chen, or Rick Martinez, or Jose Rodriguez? The answer was 1971, and we both knew it. I'm calling this lawyer tomorrow, Marcus declared, and I'm telling her to stay away from my father. If she contacts you again, I'm reporting her to the State Bar Association for elder abuse. Marcus, you can't. I can, and I will. Dad, these people are counting on you being too embarrassed to tell your family about being scammed. They're betting that you'll send them money or personal information before anyone can stop you. But I'm stopping it right now, before you get hurt. He walked over and sat on the arm of my chair, his voice softening. Look, I know you miss Mom. I know you feel lonely sometimes, and I know I haven't been the most patient son lately. Business has been tough, money's tight, and I take that stress out on you sometimes. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. And it sure as hell doesn't mean I'm going to let strangers rob you blind. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost fell for it. The mixture of guilt, love, and protection designed to make me doubt my own judgment. But I'd seen the documents, heard the sincerity in Sarah Mitchell's voice, felt the truth in my bones when she'd mentioned my friends' names. What if you're wrong? I asked quietly. Marcus's face hardened again. I'm not wrong, Dad. And tomorrow, you're going to see that I'm right. These people will disappear the moment they realize they can't get to your social security or your savings. He picked up his tool belt and headed toward the kitchen. Don't answer the door tomorrow if anyone comes by. And for God's sake, don't give anyone your social security number or bank information. Promise me that much. I nodded, but inside, something had shifted. Marcus's desperate need to control this situation. His immediate assumption that I was being scammed. His refusal to even consider that my war buddies might be real lit all felt less like protection and more like fear. Fear that he might be wrong about everything. The next morning, Marcus left for work, with a warning that felt more like a threat. Remember what we talked about, Dad. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. The moment his truck disappeared around the corner, I was at his computer. Linda had shown me how to use Google months ago, though Marcus always acted like the internet was too complicated for someone my age. My fingers shook as I typed Tommy Chen's software company into the search bar. The first result made my breath catch. Chen Technologies founder sells company to Microsoft for $52 million. The article was from 2019, complete with a photograph that stopped my heart. Older, graying at the temples, wearing an expensive suit instead of fatigues. But unmistakably Tommy. The same sharp eyes, the same slight smile that said he was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Tommy Chen, 70, built his software empire from a one-room apartment in San Francisco, starting with custom database solutions for small businesses and eventually developing enterprise-level systems used by Fortune 500 companies. Success isn't about having the biggest idea, Chen told reporters. It's about execution, persistence, and never forgetting the people who stood by you when you had nothing. People who stood by you when you had nothing. My eyes burned as I continued reading. Chen, a Vietnam veteran, has been known for his quiet philanthropy, particularly his work with veteran reintegration programs. He plans to spend his retirement finding old friends and making up for lost time. I printed the article with trembling hands, then searched for Rick Martinez. The results were even more impressive. Martinez Construction, building Texas one project at a time. Rick's company had constructed half the commercial buildings in Houston, with a reputation for treating workers fairly and finishing projects ahead of schedule. The photograph showed Rick at a construction site, hard hat in hand, grinning at the camera exactly like he used to grin at us during fight. The article mentioned his company's unusual policy of profit sharing with employees and his personal involvement in building homes for veterans' families. Business is about people, Martinez explained. You take care of your people, they take care of your business. I learned that lesson in Vietnam from 3 guys who taught me what loyalty really means. 3 guys. My heart hammered as I searched for Jose Rodriguez. Rodriguez Holdings transforms desert into luxury destinations, brought up images of stunning resorts in Arizona and New Mexico, each one designed to blend with the natural landscape rather than dominate it. Jose's philosophy of sustainable development had created an empire worth over $60 million. Just as Sarah Mitchell had claimed. The business profile included a quote that made tears run down my cheeks. Every property we develop honors the land and the people who work it. That respect comes from understanding that some things, friendship, loyalty, integrity, are worth more than profit. Those values were forged in combat with brothers I still think about every day. Brothers he still thought about every day. I spent the next 2 hours printing articles, reading interviews, studying photographs of men I'd thought were dead for decades. Every story confirmed what Sarah Mitchell had told me, but more than that, they revealed something Marcus could never understand. Success hadn't changed them. Tommy was still the strategic thinker, Rick still cared about his people, and Jose still believed in building something that lasted. The newspaper clippings painted a picture of 3 men who'd never forgotten their values, even as they'd accumulated wealth beyond imagination. Tommy donated millions to veteran organizations. Rick's company had built over 200 homes for military families. Jose's resorts employed thousands of people, many of them veterans who'd struggled to find work elsewhere. They hadn't just become rich. They'd become the kind of men worthy of respect. The kind of men Marcus dismissed as dead losers, without knowing the first thing about their character or achievements. But the most telling detail came in a small business, JOURNAL, article about unlikely partnerships in corporate America. All 3 companies, Gene Technologies, Martinez Construction, and Rodriguez Holdings, had cross-invested in each other's businesses over the years. They'd remained connected, supporting each other's success, building an informal network of mutual prosperity. The article mentioned that each company maintained a reserve partnership fund for potential future collaborations. Though the details were kept private, I stared at that phrase for a long time, remembering the trust fund Sarah Mitchell had shown me. They'd been saving my share for decades, just waiting for me to return. As I gathered the printed articles, I noticed something else. In every interview, where they mentioned their military service, they talked about the 4th member of our unit, or a friend we lost touch with, or someone we're still looking for. Never by name, probably. To protect my privacy, but the references were there. Marcus's words echoed in my memory. Real friends don't just disappear. But we hadn't disappeared from their thoughts or their loyalty. If anything, the evidence suggested they'd been searching harder for me than I'd ever searched for them. The front door slammed, and I quickly shoved the articles into my dresser drawer. Marcus called out, "Dad, everything okay in there?" "Just fine," I called back, my voice steadier than it had been in years, because for the first time in decades, everything really was fine. My war buddies weren't dead, they weren't losers, and they hadn't forgotten me. Tomorrow, I was going to call Sarah Mitchell and ask her to arrange that phone call with Tommy. Marcus could call it stupid if he wanted to. I was finally ready to be stupid enough to believe in friendship again. I waited until Marcus left for his job site Thursday morning, then dialed Sarah Mitchell's number with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She answered on the second ring, her voice professional but warm. "Mr. Hughes, I was hoping you'd call. Tommy has been asking about you every day." I did some research, I admitted. Found articles about their companies. I should have trusted you from the beginning. That's perfectly understandable. This is a lot to process. Are you ready for that phone call? More than ready. Tommy's at his home office. He's cleared his entire morning for this. Here's his private number. He's been carrying his phone with him everywhere, just in case. My hands trembled as I wrote down the numbers. After 54 years, I was about to hear Tommy Chen's voice again. I dialed slowly, each number feeling like a small act of faith. The phone rang once, twice. Dunley. Jesus Christ, is it really you? The voice was older, rougher around the edges, but unmistakably Tommy. The same cadence, the same slight California accent, the same way of cutting straight to the heart of things. "It's me, Tommy. It's really me." Silence on the other end, then something that sounded like crying. "I can't believe it. After all these years, we finally found you. Hold on, I need to sit down." I was crying too, something I hadn't done since Margaret's funeral. "Tommy, I'm so sorry. I tried to find you guys for years, but the addresses didn't work. The phone numbers were disconnected. Don't you dare apologize. We know how hard it was. The military didn't exactly help us stay in touch, did they? Plus, you moved around so much for work. And then when your son changed his name after the divorce hell, we were looking for Thompson, not Hughes. He'd done his homework, understood the complications that had kept us apart. That was Tommy, always thinking, always connecting dots. I read about your company," I said. $52 million. Tommy, you always said you'd build something big." He laughed, the same laugh that had gotten us through dark nights in foxholes. "Remember that contract we signed? The partnership agreement? We never threw it away. Dunley Rick's got the original framed in his office, and Jose keeps a copy in his safe. We always knew we'd honor it someday." Sarah mentioned a trust fund. "That's your share, partner. Every major deal, every big contract, every successful venture, we set aside your portion. It's been growing for decades, earning interest, being invested properly. That money was always yours." The weight of their loyalty hit me like a physical force. While Marcus had been calling them dead losers, they'd been treating me like family. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to San Antonio. We bought you a house not as a gift, but as your property. It's in a great neighborhood, walking distance from all three of us. We're all retired now, Dunley. We can finally be the partners we always meant to be. My son thinks this is all a scam. He's furious that I even talked to your lawyer. Tommy's voice hardened slightly. "Your son's been treating you poorly, hasn't he?" "We did some checking, Dunley. Not invasive stuff. Just making sure you were safe. Some of the neighbors we talked to were concerned about how he speaks to you." The shame burned in my chest. He's been under a lot of financial pressure. That's no excuse for disrespecting his father. Especially a father who served his country with honor. Tommy paused. "Look, we don't want to cause family problems, but we also don't want to see you unhappy. You deserve better than being called a burden." "How did you know?" "Because we know you, and we know when someone's spirit is being broken." The Dunley Hughes we served with was proud, confident, full of stories and laughter. The man Sarah described to us sounds like someone who's been convinced he's worthless. That's not the friend we remember. More tears, but these felt different, like relief instead of sadness. "Can I talk to Rick and Jose?" "They're both here, actually. We've been meeting every Thursday morning for coffee ever since we all moved to San Antonio. This week's meeting got postponed until we found you. Rick's been pacing around my kitchen for the past hour, and Jose's been sitting there with that patient smile, you remember. But I can tell he's about to burst." Put them on speaker. A moment of fumbling with the phone. Then Dunley Hughes, "You magnificent bastard." Rick's voice boomed through the speaker, as full of life as ever. "Do you know how much money we've spent looking for you? Tommy hired private investigators. I put ads in every veteran newsletter in the country. And Jose bought databases from 3 different search companies. Hello, brother." Jose's voice was quieter, but warmed me to my core. "We missed you. We never stopped missing you. I missed you too. All of you. More than you know." "Then come home," Tommy said simply. "Come home to your real family. Your son can visit whenever he wants. Hell, if he's having financial problems, maybe we can help with that too. But you don't have to live as anyone's burden ever again. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt like I had somewhere to belong. When can I come? How about tomorrow? Rick laughed. I'll drive up there myself and get you. It's only 4 hours from San Antonio to Dallas. My son will lose his mind. Let him, Jose said with uncharacteristic firmness. You've spent enough years worrying about other people's minds. Time to worry about your own happiness. I looked around Marcus's house, the spare room that had never felt like home. At the family photos that barely included me. At the life I'd accepted because I'd thought I had no other choice. Tomorrow sounds perfect. Marcus came home early that afternoon, his face dark with suspicion. He'd barely gotten through the door when he started interrogating me. Dad, Linda's sister works at the phone company. She said there was a lot of long-distance activity on our line today. What did you do? I'd known this moment would come, but I'd hoped for more time to prepare. I made some phone calls. To who? He dropped his keys with more force than necessary. Please tell me you didn't call that lawyer. I called Tommy Chen. The color drained from Marcus's face, then flooded back as deep red. You what? Dad, what? The hell were you thinking? I was thinking about talking to an old friend I haven't heard from in 50 years. An old friend who's trying to scam you. Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. Did you give him any personal information? Bank account numbers? Social security? Marcus, listen to me. No, you listen to me. He started pacing the living room like a caged animal. I've been doing research too. Dad, you know how many scams target veterans? How many con artists use military records to build fake relationships with lonely old men? He pulled out his phone, scrolling through screenshots he'd apparently prepared. Look at this. How to spot military impersonation scams. And this elder abuse through false friendship. Dad, these people study you. They learn your history. They use your service record against you. Tommy knew things only Tommy would know. Like what? Details from your military file. Stories you've told 100 times to anyone who'd listen. Dad, you've been talking about these guys for decades. Anyone could have overheard enough to fool you. I started to respond, but Marcus held up his hand. It doesn't matter now. The damage is done, but I'm not letting this go any farther. He walked to the kitchen and returned with my cell phone, one Linda had bought me for emergencies. I'm taking this until we sort this mess out, and I'm calling Sarah Mitchell tomorrow to tell her she's no longer welcome to contact my father. You can't do that. I can, and I will. Dad, you're not thinking clearly about this. The stress of Mom's death, the isolation, the loneliness, made you vulnerable to people who want to exploit that vulnerability. He sat down across from me, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Look, I understand why you want to believe this is real. The idea that your old war buddies are rich and successful and want to take care of you, like a fairy tale. But that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. What if you're wrong? I'm not wrong. His certainty was absolute, unshakable. Dad, think about it logically. If these guys were really your friends, really successful, really looking for you now, why, after all these years? They explained that. They had an explanation ready, because that's what con artists do. They prepare for every question. Every doubt. They make you feel like questioning them means you're betraying the friendship. Marcus pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before. I've been documenting everything, Dad. Every conversation we've had about this. Every suspicious phone call. Every time you've seemed confused or manipulated. If this goes to court, I need evidence that you're not capable of making these kinds of financial decisions on your own. The threat hit me like a slap. Court. Adult Protective Services. Dad, if you keep pursuing this scam, I'll have to file a report claiming elder abuse and financial exploitation. They'll investigate, and when they find out these people are trying to steal from you, you'll be placed under a conservatorship for your own protection. You'd do that to me. I'd do that for you. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his voice remained firm. Dad, I love you too much to watch strangers destroy you. Even if you hate me for it, even if you never forgive me, I won't let them hurt you. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that part of me almost believed he was acting out of love. But I remembered the credit card statements, the financial pressure, the years of being treated like an inconvenience rather than a father. What about the house in San Antonio? Marcus laughed bitterly. What house, Dad? They probably don't even live in San Antonio. They're probably calling from a boiler room in Nigeria or some other scam center. The house is part of the fantasy they're selling you. Rick is driving up tomorrow too. No one is driving anywhere. Marcus's voice turned hard as steel. I'm taking a personal day tomorrow to make sure no strangers show up here claiming to be your war buddies. And if anyone does show up, I'm calling the police. He stood up, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and determination. Dad, I know this is hard to hear, but you're being victimized by professionals. People who make their living off lonely seniors who want to believe in happy endings. What if I'm right? What if they really are my friends? Then where have they been for 50 years? Marcus spread his hands like he was presenting irrefutable evidence. If they cared about you so much, why didn't they find you when Mum was dying? When you needed help after her funeral? When you were struggling to live alone? The question stung because I'd asked them myself. But Tommy had explained about the name changes, the addresses, the difficulty of finding someone who didn't want to be found. They tried nothing. Marcus interrupted. Dad, real friends don't need private investigators and lawyers to find each other. Real friends stay in touch. These people are strangers, using your loneliness against you. He walked to the window, looking out at the street like he expected enemies to arrive at any moment. Tomorrow, this ends. I'm calling their lawyer. I'm blocking their phone numbers. And if necessary, I'm filing papers to protect you legally. You might not understand now, but someday you'll thank me. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if Marcus might be right. 50 years was a long time. People change. Maybe I was being naive. Maybe I was so desperate for connection that I was falling for an elaborate con. But then I remembered Tommy's laugh, Rick's enthusiasm, Jose's quiet warmth. Those weren't performances, they were the voices of men I'd loved like brothers, reaching across decades to bring me home. Marcus could take my phone, block their calls, and threaten legal action. But he couldn't take away the truth that was growing stronger in my heart with every hour. My war buddies were real. They were successful, and they were coming for me whether Marcus approved or not. Marcus kept his word about taking a personal date. He was planted in his recliner by 8 a.m., coffee in hand, watching the street like a sentry. Every few minutes, he'd mutter something about protecting Dad from scammers, or these people won't get past me. I'd given up trying to convince him. Let him discover the truth the hard way. At 10:30 a.m., a sleek black town car pulled into the driveway. Marcus bolted upright, his coffee sloshing onto his shirt. Dad, stay in your room. I'll handle this. But I was already walking to the front window, my heart hammering with anticipation. Two men got out of the car, one tall and lean with silver hair, one shorter and stockier, with a businessman's bearing. Even from a distance, even after 54 years, I knew those silhouettes. Tommy Chen, now in his 70s but still carrying himself like the sharp-eyed soldier who'd kept us alive in the jungle, and Rick Martinez, grayer and more distinguished than the wisecracking kid from El Paso, but with the same confident swagger that had made him everyone's favorite sergeant. Oh my God, I whispered. They're real. Marcus heard me and rushed to the window. His face went white as he saw two well-dressed, clearly prosperous men walking up his front sidewalk. These weren't the scruffy con artists he'd been expecting. The doorbell rang, and Marcus hesitated for the first time since this whole thing began. Dad, let me handle this. Even if these are real people, we don't know what they want. But I was already pushing past him, my hands shaking as I reached for the door handle. 54 years of separation, 5 years of loneliness, and countless nights of wondering if I'd imagined the brotherhood we'd shared. All of it came down to this moment. I opened the door, and there they were. Older, successful, wearing expensive clothes instead of jungle fatigues, but unmistakably my friends. Tommy's eyes still held that calculating intelligence, and Rick's face still crinkled with barely contained laughter. Hello, Dunley, Tommy said simply, and his voice broke on my name. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stand there staring at proof that some promises really are worth keeping forever. Rick stepped forward and wrapped me in a bear hug that lifted my feet off the ground. Jesus, look at you. Still the same ugly mug, just with more character lines. I was crying openly now, not caring who saw. Tommy joined the embrace, and for a moment we were just three old soldiers remembering what it felt like to be young and invincible and bound by something stronger than blood. I can't believe you're here, I managed. We told you we were coming. Rick grinned. When did we ever break a promise to you? Behind me, Marcus cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, but who exactly are you people? Tommy and Rick stepped back, and I saw their expressions shift subtly, taking in Marcus's defensive posture, his suspicious tone, the way he'd positioned himself between us and the interior of the house. "You must be Marcus," Tommy said, extending his hand. "I'm Tommy Chen, and this is Rick Martinez. We served with your father in Vietnam." Marcus ignored the offered handshake. "Can you prove that?" Rick laughed, but there was an edge to it now. "Prove it. Kid, your dad's got a scar on his left shoulder from shrapnel at Firebase Charlie. Tommy's got a tattoo of a dragon on his right forearm that he got in Saigon during our last R&R, and I've got a piece of metal in my leg that still sets off airport security. You want to see our discharge papers? Anyone could know those details, Marcus." My voice was sharper than I'd intended. "These are my friends. Dad, please, let me handle this." Marcus turned back to Tommy and Rick. "Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but my father is a vulnerable senior citizen, and I won't let you take advantage of him." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tommy's expression went completely new. Same look he'd worn when dealing with incompetent officers who threatened our unit's safety. "Scam?" Rick's voice was deceptively calm. "What kind of scam would that be, exactly?" "The kind where you pretend to be long-lost war buddies and convince elderly veterans to give you access to their finances. I've researched this. It's a common con." Tommy pulled out his phone with deliberate precision. "Sarah, it's Tommy. We're at Dunley's house, and there's a problem. His son thinks we're running a con." He listened for a moment, then handed the phone to Marcus. "My lawyer wants to speak with you." Marcus reluctantly took the phone. "Hello. Yes, this is Marcus Hughes." His face changed as he listened, cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. "I see, and you can verify all of this." "Yes, I understand." He handed the phone back to Tommy, his bravado deflating like a punctured tire. "She says you're legitimate, that you really are my father's war buddies." "We really are," Tommy confirmed. "And we really have been looking for him for 15 years. And we really do have a trust fund with his name on it, and a house waiting for him in San Antonio." Rick stepped closer to Marcus, and despite being the shorter man, somehow seemed to loom over him. "What we can't figure out is why his own son would rather believe we're criminals than accept that his father had friends who cared about him. I was protecting him from what? From people who want to give him money and a place to live with dignity." Rick's voice rose slightly. "From friends who've spent decades honoring promises they made to him." Marcus looked around, desperately, like he was searching for an escape route. "Dad, even if they're real, you can't just leave. You can't abandon your family." "Abandon?" Tommy's voice was ice cold now. "Marcus, we've done some checking on you too. We know about the credit card debt, the mortgage problems, the way you've been using your father's social security to keep your household afloat." Marcus's face flushed deep red. "That's not it, exactly what it is," Rick interrupted. "And we know how you talk to him. How you've made him feel like a burden instead of the war hero he actually is. You don't understand the situation. We understand perfectly," Tommy said. "You've been financially and emotionally dependent on your father while treating him like he's worthless. And now that he has other options, you're panicking." I watched Marcus crumble as my friends dismantled his defenses with surgical precision. These weren't the men he'd dismissed as dead losers. These were successful, intelligent, formidable people who wouldn't be intimidated or manipulated. "Dad," Marcus said desperately, "please, think about Sarah and David. They need their grandfather. We're a family that calls his war stories boring and his friends dead losers." Rick's voice dripped with contempt. "A family that makes him feel grateful for basic shelter and food." Tommy pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Dunley, these are the keys to your house. It's fully furnished, utilities connected, and there's a checking account set up with enough money to cover expenses for the next 5 years. You don't owe us anything, and you don't need anyone's permission to claim what's rightfully yours." I took the keys with hands that had finally stopped shaking. For the first time in years, I felt like I had choices. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I love you, but I won't live as anyone's burden anymore. Not when I have friends who see me as an equal partner. Dad, please, you can visit anytime you want. You can bring the kids, introduce them to their grandfather's real friends, but I'm going home with Tommy and Rick today." Marcus looked at the three of us, two successful businessmen and his father, who suddenly seemed more confident and dignified than he'd been in years, and finally understood that his control over the situation had completely evaporated. "This isn't over," he said weakly. "Yes, it is," Tommy replied. "The question now is whether you want to be part of Dunley's new life." or whether you want to keep being the son who thought his father's best friends were dead losers. As I packed my few belongings, Tommy and Rick sat at Marcus's kitchen table, spreading out documents that told the story of a friendship that had endured for over half a century. Marcus hovered nearby, his earlier hostility replaced by stunned silence as the magnitude of his mistake became clear. "This is the original partnership agreement," Tommy explained, carefully removing a framed document from a protective case. The paper was yellowed with age, but our signatures were still clearly visible for young soldiers' names written in fading ink. Marcus leaned in despite himself, studying the document. "You kept this." "We've kept everything," Rick said. "Every letter Dunley sent that we received, every address we had for him, every lead we followed trying to find him. This wasn't some casual friendship, we forgot about this was family." Tommy pulled out a thick folder of financial statements. "Marcus, do you understand what this partnership agreement actually says? It looks like some kind of joke contract." "It's not a joke. It's a legally binding partnership agreement that establishes equal ownership in any business venture undertaken by any member of the group." Tommy's voice carried the authority of someone who'd built a $50 million empire. "When I started Chen Technologies, I wasn't just starting my own company, I was starting our company." He showed Marcus the incorporation papers, where 4 names were listed as founding partners: Dunley Hughes, Tommy Chun, Rick Martinez, Jose Rodriguez, equal shares, equal voting rights, equal profit distribution. "The same thing happened when I started Martinez Construction," Rick added, producing his own set of documents. "And when Jose founded Rodriguez Holdings. We've always been partners, Marcus. The only difference is that Dunley wasn't physically present to participate in day-to-day operations." Marcus stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "But that means your father isn't just entitled to some inheritance or trust fund," Tommy explained patiently. "He owns 25% of 3 major companies. He's not our charity, Casey's our business partner." The numbers were staggering. Even I had trouble processing them. My share of Tommy's software company sale alone was worth over $13 million. My portion of Rick's construction empire was valued at $9 million. Jose's resort holdings, where was Jose? Anyway, Jose's flight was delayed, Rick explained, reading my expression. "Weather problems in Albuquerque. He'll meet us in San Antonio tonight. But he wanted me to give you this." Rick handed me another framed document, our original partnership agreement, but with a newer edition beneath it. Jose's signature on a recent codicil that transferred an additional 5% of Rodriguez Holdings to my name. He says, "You deserve the extra share for being patient with us idiots, for taking so long to find you." Marcus slumped into a chair, the reality of the situation finally penetrating. "Dad, do you realize what this means? You're worth more money than I ever dreamed of having," I finished. "But that's not why this matters, Marcus." I sat down across from my son. The partnership document spread between us, like evidence of a life he'd never understood. "For 5 years, you've made me feel like a burden. Like my stories were boring, and my friends were failures, and my past was something to be embarrassed about. You convinced me that I was lucky to have a place to sleep and food to eat. Dad, I was trying to be realistic. You were trying to keep me small." The words came out harder than I'd intended, but they needed to be said. Every time I mentioned Tommy, or Rick, or Jose, you'd roll your eyes and call them dead losers. You made me feel ashamed of the best friendships I ever had. Tommy leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Marcus, your father was never a burden to anyone. He was the glue that held our unit together in Vietnam. He saved my life at least twice, and I know he saved Rick's and Jose's more times than we can count. He was our moral compass," Rick added. "When things got bad, and they got really bad over there, Dunley was the one who reminded us who we were supposed to be, not just as soldiers, but as men." Marcus looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child, something like wonder mixed with regret. "The partnership agreement wasn't some drunken joke," Tommy continued. "It was for young men, recognizing that they'd found something rare and precious in each other. We knew that if we survived the war, we wanted to build something together. Success meant nothing if we couldn't share it with the people who mattered most. When we lost touch with your father, we didn't dissolve the partnership," Rick explained. "We expanded it. Every major contract, every successful venture, every profitable deal, we asked ourselves what Dunley would do, how Dunley would want us to handle the money, whether Dunley would be proud of the choices we were making. He's been our silent partner for decades," Tommy said. "Not because he wasn't contributing, but because his contribution was so fundamental. to who we became, that we couldn't imagine success without honoring it. Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying the documents. Perhaps finally understanding the caliber of men he'd dismissed so casually. "I owe you all an apology," he said finally. "I thought I was so worried about Dad being taken advantage of, that I never considered he might actually have friends who cared about him." "We don't need your apology," Rick said bluntly. "But your father might appreciate one." Marcus looked at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. About your friends. About your stories. About treating you like you were worthless instead of the hero you actually are." It was a start. But as I looked at the evidence of my friend's loyalty spread across the table, I realized that some wounds take time to heal, and trust once broken isn't easily repaired. "I forgive you, Marcus," I said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean staying in a situation where I'm not valued. What if things were different? What if I treated you with the respect you deserved?" I looked at Tommy and Rick, these men who'd honored a promise for 54 years, who'd built empires while saving my share, who'd never stopped believing in the bonds we'd forged in combat. "Then maybe we can rebuild our relationship," I said. "But right now, I'm going home with my real family." As I finished packing my belongings into 2 small suitcases, Marcus sat alone in the living room, staring at the partnership documents Tommy had left on the coffee table. When I came out to say goodbye, I found him holding something I hadn't seen in years, a shoebox filled with old letters and photographs. "I found these in Mom's closet after she died," he said without looking up. I was going to throw them away, but something stopped me. He pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The return addresses made my heart skip. Chen, Martinez, Rodriguez, all from the early 1970s. Letters that had reached me before the addresses went stale. Before life scattered us in different directions. "You kept writing to them for years, didn't you?" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "Until the letters started coming back undelivered. Then, I gave up." He opened one of the envelopes, carefully unfolding a letter written in Tommy's precise handwriting. "Listen to this. Dear Dunley, I got the business loan approved. $50,000 to start the software company we talked about. I know you're busy with the new baby and getting settled in your job, but the offer stands. 25% ownership, just like we agreed. When you're ready to make the leap, call me." Marcus looked up, his face crumbling. "Dad, there are dozens of these. Job offers, business opportunities, invitations to visit that were trying to include you in everything." I remembered those letters, remembered the hope they'd carried, and the practical reasons I'd convinced myself to ignore them. A new baby, a steady job with benefits, the fear of risking everything on uncertain ventures with friends I'd served with, but barely knew as civilians. "This one's from Rick," Marcus continued, his voice breaking. "Dunley, the construction company. He's taken off faster than I expected. Got a contract to build a whole subdivision outside Houston. I could use a partner I trust to help manage the crews. Margaret and the baby could love Texas, lots of space, good schools, better weather than Ohio. Think about it, brother. And here's Jose." Marcus pulled out another letter. "The ranch property deal went through. 40 acres of the most beautiful land you've ever seen. Perfect for building something special. I keep thinking about our conversations in the jungle, how you talked about wanting to build something that would last. This could be it, friend. This could be our chance." I sat down heavily, the weight of missed opportunities crushing down on me. I was scared, Marcus, scared of failing, scared of moving my family across the country for ventures that might not work out. I thought staying safe was the responsible thing to do, but they never stopped trying. Marcus pulled out more letters, some from the mid-1970s, a few from the early 1980s. "Look at the postmarks. They kept writing even when you stopped responding." The last letter in the bundle was from 1983. Written in Tommy's handwriting, but signed by all 3 of them. "Dunley, we know you're busy with your life and family, and we respect that. We're not going to keep bothering you with business opportunities if you're not interested, but we want you to know that the partnership agreement still stands, will always stand. You're our brother, and brothers don't give up on each other. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you know how to reach us. Your friends forever, Tommy, Rick, and Jose." "This is the last one," Marcus whispered. "After this, they stopped writing, but they didn't stop caring, did they?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Marcus dug deeper into the shoebox, pulling out photographs I'd forgotten existed. The 4 of us in our dress uniforms before shipping out. Candid shots from base, camp grinning and goofing around despite the war raging outside the wire. A formal group photo taken the day before we were discharged. All of us looking impossibly young and hopeful. I used to love these pictures, Marcus said, his voice thick with tears. When I was little, you'd tell me stories about Uncle Tommy, and Uncle Rick, and Uncle Jose. I thought they were the coolest guys in the world. What changed? Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying a photograph of me in my combat gear. Looking proud and confident, and nothing like the broken old man he'd been living with for the past 5 years. I think I was jealous, he admitted finally. Jealous of these men I'd never met, who seemed to know a version of my father that I'd never seen. The stories you told about Vietnam, you were brave, decisive, a leader. But the dad I grew up with worked in a factory, worried about money, seemed afraid to take any risks. He looked up at me, with tears streaming down his face. I started to think the war stories were exaggerations, that you were making yourself sound more important than you really were. It was easier to believe that than to accept that my father was a hero, who'd somehow gotten smaller over the years. The honesty in his words cut deep, but it also explained so much about the distance that had grown between us. After Mom died, it got worse, Marcus continued. You seemed so lost, so defeated. When you'd talk about your war buddies, it felt like you were escaping into fantasy instead of dealing with reality. I thought I was helping by making you face facts. The facts, according to you, were that they were dead losers. The facts, according to me, were that successful people don't just disappear from each other's lives. If these men were as successful, as you claimed, if they cared about you as much as you remembered, where were they when you needed them? Marcus gestured at the letters. But they were trying to stay connected, weren't they? You were the one who stopped responding. I nodded, the guilt and regret of decades washing over me. I let fear make my choices. I chose security over adventure, safety over loyalty. And I punished you for that choice by convincing you it was the right one. Marcus stood up, pacing to the window where Tommy and Rick were waiting in their car. Dad, those men out there, they built the future you were afraid to reach for. And they did it while keeping your place at the table, honoring a promise you'd forgotten you'd made. He turned back to me, his face raw with emotion. I've spent 5 years making you feel like a failure for having dreams that seemed too big. But your dreams weren't too big, you were just too scared to chase them. And instead of helping you find your courage, I helped you bury it. Marcus, no, let me finish. He picked up the partnership documents again. These men never gave up on you, even when you gave up on yourself. They spent decades and millions of dollars proving that some friendships are worth more than money, or convenience, or fear. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, respect. Go with them. Dad, go live the life you should have had 40 years ago. Maybe it's not too late to become the man I used to believe you were. The drive to San Antonio took 4 hours, but it felt like a journey back through time. Tommy rode shotgun while Rick drove, and the conversation flowed like we'd never been apart. They asked about Margaret, about my work, about the years we'd lost. I told them about Marcus's childhood, about the grandchildren they'd never met, about the quiet life I'd built in the shadow of dreams I'd abandoned. You know what I never understood? Rick said as we crossed into Texas. Why you stopped writing. Those last few letters I sent, I was practically begging you to come down for a visit, just to see what we were building. I was scared, I admitted. Scared of disrupting my family's stability for something that might not work out. But you knew us, Tommy said gently. You knew we weren't the kind of men who made empty promises. I thought about that, about the young soldiers I'd served with, and the successful businessmen they'd become. I knew you in war. I wasn't sure I'd know you in peace. Fair enough, Rick nodded. War does things to people. Changes them in ways you can't predict. Tell Marcus about Firebase Charlie, Tommy suggested. He needs to understand what kind of man his father really is. I shook my head. He's heard enough war stories from his old man. No, Rick said firmly. He's heard sanitized versions that you told to a child. He's never heard the truth about what you did over there. They were right. The stories I'd told Marcus over the years had been carefully edited, stripped of the real horror and the real heroism to make them suitable for a young boy's ears. As he'd grown older, I'd kept telling the same sanitized versions, rather than risk sharing the darker truths. Tell him about the night patrol, Tommy pressed. Tell him about Lieutenant Morrison. The memory came flooding back, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. Second Lieutenant Morrison, fresh out of officer training, green as grass, and convinced he knew better than his experienced NCOs. He'd ordered a night patrol into a sector our intelligence had marked as heavily fortified. Morrison was going to Get us all killed, I said quietly. He wanted to prove himself by taking unnecessary risks with other people's lives. What did you do? Rick asked, though he knew the story as well as I did. I told him his plan was suicide. When he pulled rank and ordered us out anyway, I made a decision that could have gotten me court-martialed. I'd relieved Morrison of command, right there in the field, something that could have meant military prison if it had gone wrong. But I'd known my men, known the terrain, and known that following Morrison's orders would have meant body bags for half our unit. You took command of 20 soldiers and led them through enemy territory for 6 hours, Tommy said. Brought everyone home alive while Morrison was back at base filing charges against you. Charges that were dropped when RCO realized you'd saved his ass from a massive casualty report. Rick added, it had been one of the longest nights of my life moving through hostile territory, with soldiers who were trusting me to keep them alive, knowing that one wrong decision would destroy their families along with their lives. That's when we knew, Tommy said, not that you were brave, hell. We were all brave when we had to be, but that you were a leader. Someone who'd put other people's lives before your own career, before your own safety. The kind of man you follow into hell because you know he'll bring you back out, Rick agreed. I thought about Marcus, about the way his face had lit up when he was little, and I'd tell him about the brave soldiers Daddy had served with. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped making myself the hero of those stories. Started downplaying my own role, until even I'd forgotten what I'd accomplished. Tell him about the convoy ambush, Tommy suggested. That memory was harder, darker. A supply convoy caught in a coordinated attack, vehicles burning, soldiers trapped under heavy fire. I'd been riding in the lead truck when the shooting started. 3 vehicles got hit, maybe 15 soldiers pinned down in a kill zone. The smart thing would have been to call for air support and wait for backup. But that would have meant watching good men die while you played it safe, Rick said. I'd organized a counterattack instead. Using terrain and tactics I'd learned through bitter experience. Flanking maneuvers, covering fire, extracting wounded soldiers under conditions that should have been impossible. You pulled 7 wounded soldiers out of that kill zone, Tommy said. 7 men who went home to their families instead of going home in boxes. And you took shrapnel in the shoulder doing it, Rick added. Still have the scar, right? I touched my left shoulder reflexively, feeling the old wound through my shirt. Marcus had asked about that scar once when he was young. I'd told him it was from a small accident. Nothing important. Why didn't you ever tell him the real stories? Tommy asked. Because I didn't want him to think his father was someone who solved problems with violence. I wanted him to see me as a peaceful man, someone who'd put war behind him. But war doesn't work that way, Rick said gently. War follows you home, becomes part of who you are. The question is whether you let it make you bitter, or whether you use the lessons to become a better man. Look at Jose, Tommy continued. He could have come home angry, could have let the violence consume him. Instead, he used what he learned about leadership and logistics to build an empire based on treating people fairly. And Rick turned his understanding of teamwork and construction into a company that's built homes for thousands of families. I used my strategic thinking to create software that helps businesses run more efficiently, Tommy added. We didn't leave the war behind, we transformed it into something constructive. I realized they were right. The skills that had made me a good soldier, leadership under pressure, tactical thinking, the ability to make life or death decisions quickly, those weren't things to be ashamed of or hidden from my son. Marcus needs to understand that his father wasn't just some factory worker who told inflated war stories, Rick said. He was a combat leader who saved lives and earned the respect of men who went on to achieve great things. More than that, Tommy added, he was our moral center. When things got dark over there, when the war started to eat away at our humanity, Dunley was the one who reminded us what we were fighting for. They told me stories I'd forgotten, times when I'd stopped them from making decisions they'd have regretted, moments when my judgment had kept our unit from crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. That's why the partnership agreement was never a joke, Rick said as we pulled into San Antonio. We knew that whatever we built in civilian life, we wanted it to reflect the values you taught us in combat. Honor, loyalty, putting the mission before personal gain. Looking at the city lights spreading out before us, I finally understood something that had taken 50 years to learn. The war hadn't made me smaller or less important. It had revealed strengths that I'd spent decades trying to hide. Marcus needed to hear these stories, not the sanitized versions I'd told a child, but the truth about the man his father had been when it mattered most. The man I was finally ready to be again. Jose was waiting on the front porch when we pulled into the driveway of what I was told was my new home. Even in the dim evening light, I recognized his silhouette, still tall and lean, though his hair had gone completely silver. He stood when the car stopped, and I saw him wipe his eyes before walking toward us. 54 years, he said as I got out of the car. 54 years, brother. Jose had never been one for many words, but his embrace said everything that needed saying. We stood there in my new driveway, for old soldiers finally reunited. And I felt something I'd almost forgotten, the sense of belonging somewhere, of being valued for who I really was. Welcome home, Dunley, Jose said simply. The house was beautiful. Single-story ranch with a wraparound porch, situated on a quiet street, lined with oak trees. Nothing ostentatious, but clearly expensive, clearly chosen with care. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, fully furnished, Tommy explained as he unlocked the front door. We had a decorator set it up, but if you don't like anything, we can change it. I walked through rooms that felt like they'd been designed specifically for me. Comfortable furniture, built-in bookshelves, a study with a desk positioned to look out at the garden. In the master bedroom, my old army photos had been framed and hung on the walls, pictures I'd thought were lost forever. How did you? We've been collecting everything we could find about you for years, Rick explained. Military records, photographs, even some of your old letters. We wanted this place to feel like home from day one. In the living room, I found our original partnership agreement framed on the mantelpiece, alongside photos of all 4 of us through the decades. Tommy's wedding, Rick with his construction crews, Jose at various resort groundbreakings, and scattered throughout. Pictures of me at my wedding to Margaret, holding baby Marcus, at various jobs over the years. You kept track of my whole life. We never stopped being your partners, Jose said. Even when we couldn't find you, we knew you were out there somewhere, living your life, probably wondering about us the same way we wondered about you. They showed me the garage, converted into a workshop with tools and equipment I'd only dreamed of owning. The backyard had a vegetable garden and a sitting area perfect for evening conversations. Everything was thoughtful, personal, designed by people who remembered what I'd cared about 50 years ago and assumed I might still care about those things now. There's something else, Tommy said, leading me to the study. On the desk was a leather-bound folder marked Hughes Partnership Holdings. Your complete financial portfolio, investment accounts, stock holdings, real estate properties, and this. He handed me a checkbook. The account balance made me sit down hard in the desk chair. This is just your discretionary spending account, Rick explained. The serious money is all in investments and business holdings. But this should cover whatever you need for daily expenses. I stared at the numbers, trying to process the reality of my situation. After years of living as Marcus's dependent, worrying about every dollar spent, I was suddenly wealthier than I'd ever imagined possible. What do you want in return? Nothing, Jose said firmly. This isn't charity, Dunley. It's not even friendship. It's business. You're our partner. This is your share of what we built together. But I didn't actually help build it. Yes, you did. Tommy sat on the edge of the desk. Every major decision we made, we asked ourselves what you would do. Every time we had to choose between profit and principle, we remembered the man who risked his career to save his soldiers. You were our moral compass even when you weren't physically present. My phone rang, Marcus's number on the caller ID. I'd forgotten I even had the phone with me. Dad, are you okay? You just left without saying goodbye properly. I'm fine, Marcus. Better than fine, actually. I've been thinking about everything that happened today. About the things I said, the way I treated you. Dad, I want to make this right. I looked around the house my friends had prepared for me, at the evidence of loyalty that had endured for over half a century, at the life of dignity and respect that was finally within reach. What did you have in mind? Come home, please. Linda and I talked, and we want to treat you the way you deserve to be treated, with respect, as the head of our family. The kids miss their grandfather already. Marcus, I am home. Silence on the other end. Then, Dad, those people don't know you like I do. They knew you 50 years ago, but I'm your son. I know who you are now, because the man you've been living with for 5 years isn't who I really am. He's who I became when I started believing I was nothing more than a burden. That's not true, it is true, and we both know it. I stood up, looking out the window at a neighborhood where I could walk with dignity, where people would see me as someone with value, rather than someone to be tolerated. Marcus, for 5 years you've treated me like I was lucky to have a roof over my head. My friends bought me a house. Dad, please, don't make any permanent decisions while you're emotional. I'm not emotional. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. I walked to the living room, where Tommy, Rick, and Jose were quietly unpacking my belongings, giving me privacy for the call, but making it clear they weren't going anywhere. These men have spent decades proving that some promises are worth keeping. What have you done to prove that our relationship is worth preserving? Another long silence. Then Marcus's voice, smaller and more desperate than I'd ever heard it. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. But love without respect isn't enough anymore. What do you want from me? I thought about that question, looking at the framed partnership agreement on the mantel, at the photos of 4 young soldiers who'd believed in something bigger than themselves. I want you to understand that your father isn't the broken old man you've been taking care of. I'm a combat veteran who led men in battle, a partner in businesses worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and a friend to people who've achieved extraordinary success while never forgetting where they came from. I understand that now. Do you? Because understanding it and living it are 2 different things. Marcus, you have a choice to make. You can be the son who learns to see his father as an equal partner in life, someone whose experiences and friendships have value. Or you can keep being the son who thinks his father's best friends are dead losers. Dad, that's not fair. It's completely fair. This isn't about one conversation or one apology. This is about whether you're willing to fundamentally change how you see me and treat me. I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street where I could build a new life surrounded by people who'd never stopped believing in my worth. I'm staying here, Marcus. This is my home now, with my real family. You're welcome to visit. You're welcome to bring Sarah and David. You're welcome to be part of this life, but only if you can treat me with the respect these men have shown me. And if I can't? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Tommy looked up from where he was arranging books on a shelf, and I saw him nod slightly, a gesture of support that reminded me I wasn't alone in this decision. Then you'll be choosing to lose your father the same way you've been choosing to diminish him for the past 5 years. Dad, I'm 78 years old, Marcus. However many years I have left, I refuse to spend them feeling like a burden. I've found people who see me as a blessing instead of an obligation. The question is whether you want to be one of those people. I could hear him crying on the other end of the line, and part of me wanted to comfort him, to soften the ultimatum, and make it easier for him to accept. But I thought about the credit card statements, the eye rolls, the constant reminders that I should be grateful for basic human decency. You have my address, I said finally. When you're ready to treat me like the man I actually am, instead of the burden you think I've become, you know where to find me. I hung up and stood in the silence of my new home, surrounded by friends who'd traveled across the country to bring me back into their lives. That was hard, Rick said quietly. It was necessary, I replied. Some lines can't be uncrossed. Jose walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. He'll come around. Sons eventually figure out who their fathers really are. And if he doesn't, Tommy joined us at the window, looking out at the neighborhood that would be my new world. Then he'll have to live with the knowledge that he chose pride over family. But that's his choice to make, not yours. I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Margaret died, I was living in a place where I was wanted rather than tolerated, valued rather than endured. The phone rang again. Number. I looked at it for a moment, then turned it off. Tomorrow, I'd start learning how to be Dunley Hughes again, instead of just Marcus's father. Tonight, I was going to sit on my own front porch with my war buddies and remember what it felt like to be respected. 2 weeks passed without contact from Marcus. I settled into my new life with surprising ease: morning coffee with Tommy, afternoon walks with Rick, evening conversations with Jose about everything from business to philosophy. They treated me not as an elderly dependent, but as an equal partner whose opinions mattered, whose experiences had value. The house felt like home in ways Marcus's spare room never had. I had space to spread out my books, walls to hang my photographs, a workshop where I could build the furniture I'd always dreamed of making. For the first time in years, I woke up looking forward to each day, instead of simply enduring it. Then, on a Thursday morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door, my name written in Marcus's handwriting. The paper thick and expensive, not the cheap stationery from the grocery store he usually used. Inside was a letter, but also something else, a child's drawing, faded and creased from years of handling. It showed a soldier in uniform, standing proud and tall, with my daddy, the hero, written in crayon across the top. Dad, I found this in Mom's keepsake box when I was going through her things after Linda and I separated last month. Yes, we're getting divorced. The financial stress, the fighting about how I treated you, the way she looked at me after your friends left it, all finally broke apart what was probably broken already. I drew this picture when I was 7. Right after you told me the story about saving those soldiers in the convoy ambush. Do you remember? You made it sound like an adventure story. Nothing too scary for a little boy's ears, but I knew you were a hero. I used to carry this drawing in my backpack, so I could show my friends that my dad was the bravest man in the world. I don't know exactly when I stopped believing that. Maybe it was when I got older and started noticing that other dads made more money, drove nicer cars, seemed more successful by the standards that teenage boys use to measure their fathers. Maybe it was when I realized that being a war hero doesn't automatically translate into being a civilian success story. Or maybe it was when Mum got sick, and I watched you cry every night, feeling helpless and scared and nothing like the invincible soldier from my childhood stories. I think I started resenting you for being human, instead of the mythical figure I'd created in my mind. After Mum died, it got worse. You seemed so lost, so defeated, and I couldn't stand watching the strongest man I'd ever known fall apart. It was easier to convince myself that you'd been exaggerating your war stories, that your friends were probably dead or had forgotten about you, than to accept that life had simply beaten down someone I'd thought was unbeatable. I made you smaller, in my mind, because I couldn't handle seeing you vulnerable. And then I treated you like you actually were smaller. Until you started believing it yourself. Your friends Tommy, Rick, and Jose, they came to see me yesterday, not to yell at me or threaten me, but to help me understand who you really are. Tommy showed me military records I'd never seen, commendations for bravery that you never mentioned. Rick told me stories about the soldiers you saved, men who are still alive today because of decisions you made under fire. Jose talked about the values you taught them, principles that guided them in building their businesses. But what hit me hardest was when Tommy asked me a simple question. When your father told you war stories as a child, did he ever make himself sound like the only hero? Or did he always talk about his friends, his unit, the other guys who were just as brave? I realized that even in the stories where you were clearly the hero, you always shared the credit. You talked about Tommy's quick thinking, Rick's courage, Jose's steady leadership. You made everyone around you sound more important than yourself, even when you were the one making the life or death decisions. That's who you've always been, isn't it? The man who lifts others up, who takes responsibility for everyone else's welfare, who leads from the front but never claims all the glory. And I repaid that humility by convincing you that you had no glory worth claiming. Dad, I can't undo 5 years of making you feel worthless. I can't take back the times I called your friends dead losers, or rolled my eyes at your stories, or made you feel like a burden instead of a blessing. But I can tell you this. I'm going to spend whatever time I have left proving that I'm worthy of being your son. I've enrolled in counseling to work on my anger and my need to control everything around me. I've started attending veteran support group meetings, not because I'm a veteran, but because I want to understand what you and your friends went through, and how it shaped the men you became. I've also started a small scholarship fund at the local community college, the Dunley Hughes Veterans Education Fund. It's not much yet, just a few $1,000s from selling some things I don't need, but I want to help other veterans the way your friends helped you. I know you don't owe me forgiveness. I know that moving in with Tommy, Rick, and Jose was the right decision, and I'm not asking you to change that. But I'm asking for the chance to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of respect, instead of obligation. Don't want my children to know their grandfather as the hero he's always been, not the diminished version of himself I convinced him to become. I want to learn the real war stories, the ones I was too immature to handle before. I want to meet your friends as your son, not as the bitter man who almost kept you from finding your way back to them. Most of all, I want you to be proud to call me your son again. I love you, Dad, not the way I loved you when you were dependent on me and I felt needed, but the way a son should love his father, with admiration, respect, and gratitude for everything you sacrificed to raise me. Your son, if you'll still have me. Marcusps. Sarah and David want to know when they can visit their grandfather in his new house. I told them that's entirely up to their grandfather. I sat on my front porch reading that letter 3 times, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. Anger at the years wasted, sadness for the pain we'd both carried, but also something like hope beginning to stir in my chest. Tommy found me there an hour later, still holding the letter and the faded drawing. "From Marcus?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think he's finally ready to meet his father," Tommy said simply. The question is whether you're ready to meet your son. I called Marcus that evening, my hands steadier than they'd been during our last conversation. He answered on the first ring, his voice cautious but hopeful. Dad, I got your letter. And the drawing. A long pause. Then, I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me? Marcus, that letter, it was the first time in years you've talked to me like I'm a person instead of a problem to be managed. I've been doing a lot of thinking about who I became after Mum died, about the way I treated you, Dad. I'm ashamed of the man I've been. I looked out my front window, at the life my friends had given me, the house, the neighborhood, the respect I'd forgotten I deserved. But I also thought about the 7-year-old boy who'd drawn his daddy as a hero, and wondered if that boy was still somewhere inside the bitter man Marcus had become. Shame is a starting point, not an ending point, I said. The question is what you do with it. I want to do better. I want to be better. Not just because you have rich friends now, but because you deserve a son who sees your worth. It's going to take time, Marcus. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I know. Dad, would you be willing to meet with me? Just the two of us, somewhere neutral. I have things I need to say that I couldn't fit in a letter. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to stay safe in my new life, surrounded by people who'd never made me feel small. But another part remembered the child who'd carried my picture to school, proud to tell his friends about his hero father. There's a coffee shop on Main Street, near the river. Grindhouse Coffee. I can be there tomorrow morning. Whatever time works for you. 10 o'clock, Dad. Thank you for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. Everyone deserves a chance to become who they're supposed to be. I'm just not sure I can handle watching you waste another one. The next morning, I arrived at Grindhouse Coffee 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner, away from the morning rush crowd. Marcus walked in exactly at 10, looking around nervously until he spotted me. He was thinner than I remembered, his face drawn with stress and sleepless nights. He sat down across from me, his hands shaking slightly, as he placed a manila folder on the table between us. I brought some things I wanted to show you, he said. Evidence of the changes I'm trying to make. He opened the folder and pulled out a certificate from the VA Counseling Center. I've had 6 sessions so far with a therapist who specializes in family dynamics and grief counseling. Turns out I never really processed Mom's death, just buried it under anger and the need to control everything around me. Next came a bank statement showing the scholarship fund he'd mentioned in his letter. The balance was larger than I'd expected. I sold my truck, downgraded the house, got rid of a lot of stuff that was just feeding my ego. The scholarship fund has enough to help 3 veterans per semester with tuition and books. Why veterans? Marcus looked down at his hands. Because I spent 5 years diminishing a veteran, and I want to spend the rest of my life making up for that. This seemed like a place to start. He showed me printouts from the veteran support group meetings he'd been attending. I'm not a veteran, so, mostly, I just listened. But hearing these men talk about their service, their struggles with civilian life, the way some of their families treat them, like they're damaged goods, Dad, I realized I wasn't the only son who failed to understand what his father had been through. What did you learn? That coming home from war isn't an ending. It's a transition that never really finishes. That the skills that make someone a good soldier don't always translate to civilian success. But that doesn't make them less valuable. That respect should be earned through character, not just achievements. He pulled out one more document, a handwritten letter addressed to Tommy, Rick, and Jose. I wrote this for your friends, apologizing for my behavior, thanking them for taking care of you, and asking if there's any way I can be part of your life without disrupting what they've built for you. I read the letter, surprised by its humility and maturity. Gone was the defensive, controlling tone I'd grown accustomed to. This sounded like the son I'd raised, the boy who'd once been proud of his father's service. Marcus, this is a good start. But I need to understand something. Why now? Why are you suddenly ready to change? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. Because I watched 3 strangers treat my father as something precious while I'd been treating him as disposable. Because I realized that when you die, I'm going to have to live with the memory of being the son who made his war hero father feel worthless in his final years. His voice broke slightly, but mostly because Linda asked me a question before she left. She said, if Marcus treats his own father like garbage, how do you think he's going to treat Sarah and David when they're adults and he doesn't need them anymore? The honesty in his words hit me harder than any apology could have. I don't want to be the father to my children that I've been the son to you, he continued. I don't want them to grow up thinking that family love comes with conditions and scorekeeping and constant judgment. What do you want from me, Marcus? A chance to prove that I can be the son you raised me to be. Not the bitter, controlling man I became after Mom died, but the boy who used to be proud to tell people his dad was a hero. I looked at this man who'd caused me so much pain, who'd nearly succeeded in convincing me I was worthless, and saw something I'd almost given up hope of seeing. Genuine remorse and a real desire to change. One chance, I said finally. But Marcus, if you slip back into treating me like a burden, if you disrespect me or my friends, if you make me feel small, again that's it. No more chances, no more forgiveness, no more family relationship. Understand? Do you? Because this isn't about you proving you've changed. This is about you actually changing. Day by day, conversation by conversation, choice by choice. He nodded, tears running down his face. Dad, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to earn it. However long it takes, whatever it costs me, I want to be worthy of being called your son again. For the first time in 5 years, I looked at Marcus and saw, not the man who'd diminished me, but the possibility of the man he could still become. It was enough for a beginning. Rebuilding trust with Marcus was like learning to walk again after a serious injury, slow, painful, and requiring more faith than seemed reasonable. But over the following months, small moments began to accumulate into something that resembled hope. He started visiting every Sunday, bringing Sarah and David to spend afternoons in my new home. At first, the children were hesitant, uncertain why Grandpa had moved away and why Daddy seemed so different around him now. But gradually, they relaxed into the rhythm of these visits. Tell us about the war, Grandpa. 10-year-old Sarah asked one afternoon while we sat in my workshop. She was helping me sand a jewelry box I was making for her, her small hands careful with the sandpaper. I glanced at Marcus, who was teaching 8-year-old David how to use a measuring tape. The old Marcus would have interrupted, claiming that stories were inappropriate for children. But this Marcus nodded encouragingly. What would you like to know? Were you really a hero? The question hit me unexpectedly. I thought about the sanitized stories I'd told Marcus as a child, the real experiences I'd shared with Tommy, Rick, and Jose, the years I'd spent believing I was neither hero nor worth remembering. I was a soldier who did his job, I said carefully. Sometimes that job required being brave, but mostly it required taking care of the men I served with. Like Uncle Tommy and Uncle Rick and Uncle Jose. She'd met my friends several times now, and they'd quickly become favorite uncles to both children. Tommy had taught David chess, Rick had shown Sarah how to identify different types of birds, and Jose had started a small garden with both kids in my backyard, exactly like them. We took care of each other. Daddy says you saved people's lives. I looked over at Marcus, surprised. He'd been listening while pretending to focus on his measuring lesson with David. We all saved each other's lives. That's what families do. They protect each other when things get dangerous. Is that why you moved here? To be with your family from the war? The innocence of her question, the way she instinctively understood that family wasn't just about blood relations, made my chest tight with emotion. Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes families get separated by circumstances, but real families always find their way back to each other. David looked up from his measuring tape. Are we still your family too, Grandpa? Marcus had stopped pretending to work, his face tense as he waited for my answer. You'll always be my family. David, family isn't just about living in the same house, it's about caring for each other, respecting each other, and being there when it matters most. Later, after the children had fallen asleep on my couch watching a movie, Marcus and I sat on the front porch while the sun set over the neighborhood. They love you, he said quietly. They've missed you more than I realized. I've missed them too. But Marcus, this arrangement, the Sunday visits, the carefully polite conversations, it's not sustainable long term. What do you mean? I chose my words carefully. I mean that either we're rebuilding a real relationship, or we're just going through the motions to make everyone feel better. And going through the motions doesn't honor what either of us has been through. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out at the street where Tommy was taking his evening walk. They'd started acknowledging each other with waves and brief conversations, though I knew Marcus still felt intimidated by my friend's success and obvious loyalty to me. I want it to be real, he said finally, but I don't know how to get there from here. Dad, for 5 years I convinced myself that I was the responsible one. The adult dealing with reality while you lived in fantasies about your war buddies. Finding out I was completely wrong about something that fundamentally it's shaken everything I thought I knew about myself. Good. Maybe that's where real change starts. But how do I trust my own judgment going forward? If I could be so wrong about something so important, what else am I wrong about? It was the most vulnerable thing he'd said to me since his apology letter, and I recognized the fear underneath it. He'd built his identity around being the practical one, the son who dealt with hard truths while his father chased impossible dreams. Learning that his hard truths were actually cruel delusions had left him questioning everything. Marcus, do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to quit baseball because you struck out in the championship game? You made me stick with it for the rest of the season. What did I tell you about failure? He thought for a moment. That failure isn't about making mistakes. It's about refusing to learn from them. And what did you learn from finishing that baseball season? That one mistake doesn't define you if you're willing to do the work to improve. So what are you going to learn from the mistake of treating your father like a burden for 5 years? Marcus looked at me with something that might have been respect and expression. I hadn't seen from him in longer than I could remember. Assumptions can be dangerous. That success isn't just about money or conventional achievement. That loyalty and character matter more than I thought they did. And that my father was always the man I thought he was when I was 7 years old. I just forgot how to see him clearly. A few weeks later, Marcus asked if he could join our Thursday morning coffee gatherings with Tommy, Rick, and Jose. The first few meetings were awkward, Marcus clearly feeling outclassed by men who'd built business empires. My friends politely, cordial, but reserving judgment about his character. But gradually, something shifted. Marcus began asking genuine questions about their businesses, their philosophies, their memories of our time in Vietnam. He listened more than he talked, something that would have been impossible for the controlling man he'd been a year earlier. Your father taught us that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, Tommy told him one morning. It's about making sure everyone else's voice gets heard. He had this way of asking questions that made you think deeper about your choices, Rick added. Not judging, just helping you see all the angles you might have missed. Still does, Jose observed, glancing at me with a slight smile. Marcus looked around the table at 3 of the most successful men he'd ever met, all of them crediting his father with teaching them lessons that had shaped their lives and careers. I spent years thinking he was just an old man telling inflated war stories, Marcus said quietly. I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Sometimes we're too close to something to see it clearly, Tommy replied. The important thing is that you're seeing it now. That afternoon, Marcus asked if he could take a photo of the 5 of us together. The original 4 partners, plus the son, who was finally learning to appreciate what his father had always been. Looking at that picture later, I realized something had fundamentally changed. Marcus wasn't just going through the motions of being a better son. He was becoming a man I could be proud of. Someone who understood that respect and character mattered more than any external measure of success. It wasn't complete forgiveness, yet trust takes time to rebuild. But it was a foundation we could build on. A beginning that honored both the pain of the past and the possibility of a better future. 6 months after moving to San Antonio, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I invited Marcus to move to Texas, not to live with me, that boundary would remain, but to relocate his family so we could build a real relationship, instead of conducting it through weekend visits and careful phone calls. Dad, are you serious? Marcus asked, when I made the offer during one of our Thursday morning coffee sessions. Tommy, Rick, and Jose had encouraged me to extend the invitation, but the final decision had been mine alone. I'm serious, but there are conditions. I pulled out a document. I'd had Sarah Mitchell prepare a formal agreement that laid out expectations and boundaries. You'll get your own place, pay your own way, and earn your own living. No financial dependence on me or my friends. But if you're willing to do that, Rick's offered you a job with Martinez Construction. Good pay, real opportunities for advancement, a chance to learn from people who understand what integrity means. Marcus stared at the papers, his hands shaking slightly. Why would you do this? After everything I put you through? Because Sarah and David deserve to know their grandfather, and you deserve a chance to become the man you were meant to be. But mostly because family means giving people opportunities to change, not just punishing them for who they used to be. Rick leaned forward, his expression serious. Marcus, this isn't charity. Construction is hard work, and I don't give second chances to people who don't earn them. But your father believes you've changed, and that's enough for me to give you a shot. What would I be doing? Starting at the bottom, like everyone else. Learning the business from the ground up. If you prove yourself, there's room for advancement. If you don't, you'll find yourself looking for another job pretty quickly. Tommy added, we've all discussed this, and we're willing to help you relocate. But understand this is about giving your family a fresh start, not about solving your problems for you. Marcus looked around the table at 4 men who had every reason to want nothing to do with him, who were offering him opportunities he'd never done anything to earn. I don't understand why you'd help me. Because your father asked us to, Jose said simply. And because family extends beyond blood relations when you let it. The move took 2 months to coordinate. Marcus sold his house in Dallas, used the equity to buy a modest place 20 minutes from my neighborhood, and started working construction while Sarah and David finished their school year. Watching him adapt to physical labor was illuminating. The Marcus I'd lived with for 5 years had been soft, accustomed to office work and supervisory roles that kept his hands clean. Construction work was different, demanding, exhausting, requiring him to prove himself through performance rather than talk. It's humbling, he told me after his first week. I'm the oldest guy on most crews, and some of these guys have been doing this work since they were teenagers. They know I'm Rick's friend's son, but that doesn't buy me any respect. I have to earn it. How does that feel? Scary, but also kind of liberating. For the first time in years, I'm being judged on what I do rather than who I know or what I can control. The physical demands of the work changed him in ways I hadn't expected. He lost weight, developed calluses, started moving with the confidence that comes from mastering difficult skills. But more importantly, he started understanding the dignity that comes from honest labor. These guys I worked with, he said one evening while we watched Sarah and David play in my backyard, some of them are veterans. They tell stories about their service, about the friends they made, about the experiences that shaped them. And they talk about you, about me. Rick apparently tells stories about the unit he served with, about the sergeant who taught him that leadership means taking care of your people. They know you're that sergeant. I felt a flush of pride, but also something deeper, the recognition that the values I'd tried to instill in combat had found their way into civilian life, through men who'd never forgotten their lessons. Dad, I spent years thinking that success meant having power over other people, being the one who made decisions and gave orders. But watching Rick with his crews, seeing how Tommy treats his former employees, listening to Jose talk about business, ethics, learning that real success means earning respect through character. As summer turned to fall, Marcus proved himself on Rick's crews and earned promotion to crew leader. It was a small step up, but the pride in his voice when he told me about it reminded me of the boy who'd once shown me his perfect report cards. I'm recommending him for foreman training, Rick told me privately. He's got natural leadership ability once he stops trying to control everything and starts trusting his people. The real test came when Marcus's divorce was finalized, and Linda demanded additional child support based on his new income. The old Marcus would have fought viciously, used the children as weapons, made everyone's life miserable in pursuit of winning. Instead, he agreed to her demands without argument. Dad, I realized something, he explained when I asked about his decision. For years, I used financial control as a way to make people dependent on me. I made you feel like you owed me gratitude for basic necessities. I used money to keep Linda from leaving even when our marriage was obviously over. And now I want my children to see their father as a man who keeps his word and treats people fairly, even when it costs him. I want them to be proud of me the way I should have been proud of you. That evening, I updated my will. Not to cut Marcus out, quite the opposite. I added provisions that would give him access to educational funds for Sarah and David, startup capital if he ever wanted to begin his own business, and a substantial inheritance that would provide security for his family. But I also added conditions. The money would be held in trust, managed by Tommy, Rick, and Jose, and released only if Marcus continued to demonstrate the character growth he'd begun. If he reverted to his old patterns of control and manipulation, the funds would go to veteran organizations instead. I'm not trying to control you from beyond the grave, I explained when I showed him the will. I'm trying to protect the man you're becoming from the man you used to be. Marcus read the document carefully, understanding both the opportunity and the responsibility it represented. It's fair, he said finally. More than fair. Dad, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I definitely don't deserve your trust. But I promise you Sarah and David are going to grow up knowing their grandfather as the hero he's always been. Looking at my son, really looking at him for the first time in years, saw not the bitter, controlling man who'd made me feel worthless, but the father he was becoming and the man he might yet be. Justice, I realized, wasn't about punishment. It was about creating conditions where people could become who they were meant to be. And redemption wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about using the lessons of that past to build something better for the future. 1 year after my friends found me in Marcus's spare room, we gathered for what would become our annual tradition, a reunion dinner, celebrating not just our friendship, but the family we'd built around it. The guest list had grown beyond the original four. Marcus was there, with Sarah and David, both children now comfortable calling Tommy, Rick, and Jose their war uncles. Rick's daughter had flown in from Houston with her family. Tommy's grandchildren, adopted through his late wife's family, considered me their honorary grandfather. Jose's extended family, a sprawling network of cousins and nieces and nephews, treated me like blood relation. But the centerpiece of the evening wasn't the food or the company, impressive as both were. It was the display case Tommy had commissioned for my living room, a beautiful mahogany cabinet that held my military medals, commendations, and photographs alongside mementos from our 5 decades of friendship. "Grandpa," Sarah said, studying the Purple Heart I'd never mentioned to Marcus, "why didn't you ever tell us about these medals?" I looked at the display case, at the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Combat Infantry Badge, and the various unit commendations I'd earned but never talked about. For decades, I'd kept them in a shoebox, hidden away like shameful secrets, instead of honored memories. "I guess I thought they were just old pieces of metal," I said. "Reminders of a war most people wanted to forget." "They're not just metal," David said with the certainty that only children possess. "They're proof that you're a hero." Marcus stood beside his children, his face reflecting emotions I was still learning to read. Pride, certainly, but also something deeper, kind of wonder at discovering depths in his father he'd never known existed. "Dad," he said quietly, "I never knew about the Bronze Star. What did you do to earn it?" For a moment, I considered deflecting, giving him the sanitized version I'd perfected over the years. But looking around the room at my real family blood relations and chosen brothers alike, I realized those stories deserved to be told truthfully. It was during the siege at Firebase Alpha. We'd been cut off for 3 days, running low on ammunition and medical supplies. A helicopter tried to drop supplies, but it was shot down about 200 yards outside our perimeter. The room went quiet, even the youngest children sensing they were hearing something important. The pilot and co-pilot were alive, but trapped, and the supplies we needed were scattered around the crash site. Command said it was too dangerous to attempt a rescue. We should wait for reinforcements. "But you didn't wait," Tommy said, though he'd heard this story before. "No, we didn't wait. Rick, Jose, Tommy, and I put together a volunteer team. We crawled through enemy territory, extracted the aircrew, and recovered enough supplies to hold out until the cavalry arrived. All 4 of you got Bronze Stars for that mission," Rick added. "But Dunley was the one who planned it, who convinced our code to let us try, who kept us all alive during 6 hours of the worst fighting I've ever experienced." Sarah looked up at me with wide eyes. "You saved the helicopter people." "We all did, sweetheart. That's what teamwork means, everyone doing their part, so everyone goes home safe." Jose smiled from across the room. "He's still doing it, you know, still making sure everyone goes home safe." "What do you mean?" David asked. "Well, he made sure your father found good work, didn't he? Made sure you and your sister got to know your war uncles. Made sure this family stays together, even when it gets complicated." I looked around the room at the evidence of what Jose meant. Marcus had been promoted to construction supervisor, earning respect through competence, rather than demanding it through authority. Sarah and David were thriving in their new schools, confident children who spoke proudly of their grandfather's service. The scholarship fund Marcus had started now helped a dozen veterans each semester. But more than that, we'd built something that transcended individual success or failure. We'd created a model of what family could be when it was based on respect, rather than obligation, character rather than blood, choice rather than circumstance. "You know what the real miracle is?" Tommy said, raising his glass of wine. 54 years ago, 4 scared kids made a promise to each other in a jungle on the other side of the world. Tonight, we're keeping that promise with our children and grandchildren around the table. 2 promises kept, Rick added, raising his own glass. 2 families chosen and families given, Jose continued. 2 second chances and new beginnings, Marcus said, looking directly at me. To honor, loyalty, and coming home, I finished, thinking of all the ways those words could be interpreted. As the evening wound down, and families began gathering children and preparing to leave, Marcus lingered behind to help with cleanup. "Dad," he said, as we loaded the dishwasher, "I have something to tell you. Rick offered me a partnership in a new residential development project. Nothing huge, but a chance to build my own business with his guidance and backing." "What did you tell him?" I told him I'd need to think about it. Talk it over with my family. He paused, loading plates with careful precision. "I wanted to ask your advice." The request hit me unexpectedly. For 5 years, Marcus had treated my opinions as irrelevant, my experience as outdated, my judgment as compromised by age and sentiment. Now he was asking for guidance on one of the biggest decisions of his professional life. "What's your instinct telling you?" "That it's a chance to build something I can be proud of. Something that reflects the values I'm trying to learn. But also, that it's risky, that I could fail and disappoint people who've invested in me." I thought about the young soldier I'd been, facing choices between safety and courage, between what was easy and what was right. "Marcus, you know what I learned in Vietnam? That the biggest risk isn't failing at something difficult. It's succeeding at something that doesn't matter." "What do you mean?" "I mean that building houses for families, creating jobs for good workers, being a partner that Rick can trust that matters. The only failure would be not having the courage to try." He nodded, slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "You think I should take the partnership? I think you should take the chance to become the man you're capable of being. The partnership is just the vehicle." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat in my study looking at the partnership agreement. Dad had started it all for young soldiers' names on a piece of paper. A promise that had endured longer than anyone could have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Talk to Rick. I'm in. Thanks for teaching me that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." I smiled, thinking about the boy who'd drawn his daddy as a hero, the bitter man who'd called my friends dead losers, and the father he was becoming who understood that heroism wasn't about perfect people making perfect choices. It was about flawed people choosing to grow. Outside my window, I could see lights in Tommy's house, where he was probably reading before bed. Rick's place was dark. He was an early sleeper and early riser. Jose's back porch light was on, where he liked to sit with his evening coffee and think about the day. My war buddies weren't dead losers. They were successful, loyal, generous men who'd spent decades proving that some promises are worth keeping forever. And my son wasn't the bitter, controlling man who'd tried to convince me otherwise. He was a work in progress, like all of us, learning that respect is earned through character and that family is built through choice as much as blood. I thought about Margaret, about how proud she'd be to see Marcus becoming the man she'd always believed he could be, about Sarah and David, growing up in a family that valued honor over wealth, loyalty over convenience, about the legacy we leave not just in money or property, but in the values we pass on and the relationships we build. Tomorrow, Tommy and I would take our morning walk. Rick would stop by to discuss Marcus's new partnership. Jose would tend his garden and share wisdom in his quiet way. Marcus would go to work building homes for families who needed them. Sarah and David would go to school, carrying stories about their grandfather, the war hero, and their father, the man who learned to change. And I would wake up not as anyone's burden, but as someone's blessing: a father, a friend, a partner, a grandfather, a man whose war buddies had found their way back to him, and whose son had found his way back to honor. Some stories end with justice served or revenge taken. This one ended with something better: a family redeemed, promises kept, and the understanding that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. My name is Dunley Hughes. I'm 79 years old, and I'm finally home.